Hey, welcome to Opinions with me, Opinionated Lorie, and with Katie. Hey,
I just love that song, don't you, girl?
I love that song. Every time I hear it, it gives me so much inspiration. That's right. Don't let
What you want to
nobody
do
tell
with
you.
Charlie Brown on them, girl?
They don't know nothing about that.
Well, y'all, that's Trina Davis, and Trina say it's 2022, and it's not too late to do whatever you want to do in 2022. And I want to welcome you to Rhythm Flow Radio live streams and
And opinions, Rhythm Flow Radio. Because you know what they say about opinions are like what?
opinions are like assholes. Everybody got one.
That's right. That's right. So,
And
hey,
guess
Katie.
what? I got somebody here with me.
Oh, who's here with us?
Where are you, Professor Kincaide? Speak up. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Uh-oh.
Professor, hold on. I know I ain't lost him. Let me go find him. I had him a few minutes ago. Let me see if I done lost. Like I lost him. I'm gonna have to find him back. Go ahead. I'm gonna go find him.
Okay, well, we look for him. So hey, today's February 2nd, 2022, and guess what today is and what yesterday started? It's Black History Month, as we all know, the month of February. So for Black History Month, we're going to be doing a four-part series looking at the city of Chicago and how it developed from the Great Migration, which was from 1910 to 1970. And since we're based in
We got
Chicago,
you. We
we would
got
like
you.
to put a focus on the impact of this massive migration of 6 million African Americans to the
Yeah.
north and how it affected the development of the city. We're going to look at areas such as jobs, music, housing, food, and just general race relations. And also, we're going to try to answer some of the questions, or what are some of the causes or what were some of the causes of the Great Migration, and how did the newly migrated African Americans cope with this new landscape in Chicago of different food and weather and just a different climate. And then how are African Americans currently holding up in the city? We'll look into that in some of our future episodes. And then what lies ahead for African Americans in the city of Chicago.
Mhm. Okay, I have the analyst here, Professor Don Kincaid. Say hello to everyone, Professor.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing?
Hello, Professor Kincaid. Good. How are you?
I'm doing quite well.
Okay.
Fantastic. So we'll go ahead and start our episode one: Strange Fruit, Reconstruction, Sharecropping, and a Raw Deal, 1865 to 1916.
Okay, so today I'm gonna start out reading what y'all know I can't sing a lick. Okay. If I was to sing, the computer probably would take some legs and run up out of here. I know the phone would leave, that's for sure. But I'm going to recite for you part of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. Lord knows I hope I do her justice.
You will.
Okay. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the popular trees. Pastoral scenes of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scents of magnolias, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the treetop to drop. Here's a strange and bitter crop. Strange fruit, Billie Holiday.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely right.
The Great Migration was one of the largest movements of people in the United States history. Approximately 6 million Black people moved from American South to the northern, Midwestern, and Western states, roughly from the 1910s until the 1970s. The driving force behind the mass movement was to escape racial violence, pursue economic and educational opportunities, and obtain freedom from the oppression of Jim Crow. The Great Migration is often broken into two phases, coinciding with participation and effects of the United States in both world wars. The first Great Migration, which was from 1910 to 1940, had Black Southerners relocate to northern and Midwestern cities, including New York, Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh. When the war effort ramped up in 1917, more able-bodied men were sent off to Europe to fight, leaving their industrial jobs vacant. The labor supply was further strained with the decline in immigration from Europe and standing bans of people of color from other parts of the world. All this afforded the opportunity for the Black population to be the labor supply in non-agricultural industries. Although the migrants found better jobs and fled the South entrenched in Jim Crow, many African Americans faced injustices and difficulties during migrating. The Red Summer of 1919 was rooted in tensions and prejudice that arose from white people having to adjust to the demographic changes in their local communities. From World War I until World War II, it is estimated that about 2 million Black people left the South for other parts of the country. World War II brought an expansion to the nation's defense industry and many more jobs for African Americans in other locales, again encouraging a massive migration that was active until the 1970s. During this period, more people moved north and further west to California's major cities such as Oakland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, as well as Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington. Within 28 years within 20 years of World War II, a further 3 million Black people migrated throughout the United States. Black people who migrated during the second phase of the Great Migration were met with housing discrimination as localities had started to implement restrictive covenants and redlining, which created segregated neighborhoods, but also served as a foundation for the existing racial disparities in wealth in the United States. So let's talk a little bit about the Reconstruction era. So which is kind of like the backdrop of where this sort of where the migration began during the Reconstruction era. There was also something called sharecropping, and sharecropping is a system where the landlord planner allows a tenant to use the land in exchange for a crop or share of the crop. And this encouraged tenants to work to produce the biggest harvest that they could and ensure that they would remain tied to the land and unlikely leave for other opportunities. So prior to the Civil War, sharecropping is known to have existed in Mississippi and is believed to have been in place in Tennessee. However, it was not until the economic upheaval caused by the American Civil War and the end of slavery during and after the Reconstruction that it became widespread in the South. It is theorized that sharecropping in the United States originated in the Natchez district, roughly centered in Adams County in Mississippi, with its county seat being Natchez. After the war, plantations and other lands throughout the South were seized by the federal government. In 1865, General William T. Sherman issued Special Field Orders number 15, which announced that he would temporarily grant newly freed families 40 acres of this seized land on the islands and coastal regions of Georgia. Many believed that this policy would be extended to all former slaves and their families as repayment for their treatment at the end of the war. In the summer of 1865, President Andrew Johnson, as one of the first acts of Reconstruction, instead ordered all land under federal control be returned to the owners from whom it had been seized. Southern landowners thus found themselves with a great deal of land, but no liquid assets to pay for it. Many former slaves, now called freedmen, having no land or other assets of their own, needed to work to support their families. A sharecropping system centered on cotton, a major cash crop, developed as a result. Large plantations were subdivided into plots that could be worked by sharecroppers. Initially, sharecroppers in the American South were almost all Black former slaves, but eventually, cash-strapped indigent white farmers were integrated into the system. During Reconstruction, the Federal Freedmen's Bureau ordered the arrangements for freedmen and wrote and enforced their contracts. American sharecroppers worked a section of the plantation independently, usually growing cotton, tobacco, rice, sugar, and other cash crops, and receiving half of the parcel's output. Sharecroppers also often received their farming tools and all their other goods from the landowners they were contracted with. Landowners dictated decisions relating to the crop mix, and sharecroppers were often in agreements to sell their portion of the crop back to the landowner, thus being subjected to manipulated prices. In addition to this, landowners threatening to not renew the lease at the end of the growing season were able to apply pressure to their tenants. Sharecropping often proved economically problematic as the landowners held significant economic control. Southern landowners thus found themselves with a great deal of land but no liquid assets to pay for labor. Many former slaves, now called freemen, having no land or other assets of their own, needed to work to support their families. The sharecropping system centered on cotton, a major cash crop, developed as a result. Large plantations were subdivided into plots that could be worked by sharecroppers. Initially, sharecropping in the American South were almost all Black former slaves, but eventually cash-strapped indigent white farmers were integrated into the system. So this is basically the backdrop of really kind of demonstrates some of the reasons why African Americans really felt the push to really leave that situation and to find better opportunities. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the because of World War I, a lot of people, white people, were leaving for the war, so it really left a hole in terms of the the labor force in all the northern cities, specifically in Chicago. So I know that my family came up, my dad specifically came up in like the 1920s as part of that the Great Migration.
Okay, another reason that they left too is it's because in 1865 that Emancipation Proclamation, where they were supposed to be free. Okay, a lot of these people did not know that they were free, and when they found out that they were free, some of their masters did not want to let them go, and they fled the South and came to the North. And not only did they, I should say, flee the South, they fled some of the areas where they were still enslaved and went to other areas.
Yeah,
that was enough. I know Professor Kincaide can expound on this. Why don't you come on in here and tell us a little bit about that period? What is that, 19?
From 1865 through 1910.
Yeah.
Yeah, during that period, America was in a dilemma over whether they were going to have Western expansion of slavery, because the situation was where the country was beginning to acquire new territories, considered compromise, of course, the Western expansion toward California. What people don't really, I think, understand is that the country had been in war basically over whether it's going to be totally free or not. America is never, well, freedom is not free. That's what we always say. Because when it gets to the point where we declared independence from England, because we didn't want to be told how to operate over here in this country and pay taxes to England. We did adopted a system of laws over here, even after the Mayflower Compact. We the laws were specifically geared toward protection of a specific race and gender of individuals. So there was no freedom when it came down to the whole process from the beginning. And so during that period of migration, during slavery, everybody was happy because they had a free labor source of talented individuals who could come over and do virtually everything that we have seen done in all of the states, not just in the southern states. We were the architects, we were the people who cleared the land, we were the ones who plowed fields and made the crops, and virtually even raised the children of the white owners.
Mm-hmm.
We nursed the babies and so on and so forth. So we were a very handy labor source. But once the country started going toward freedom, and people started saying, okay, well, there was a segment of individuals in the population who were white that said, okay, we know this is not right. So because of a religious belief, we're not going to support slavery. So they started opposing the white people who were owning slaves, and of course it led to once the government started forming in Washington, it started taking more authority over the states that were imposing slave rights and selling individuals, because the slavery didn't just apply to the black people after a while, it applied to everybody. So these people were incarcerated, and everybody that they could put in a slave situation, they were doing it with them, and they weren't just black people. But the government then started trying to make rules to handle what was going on in the country, because it was economically beginning to affect the whole country. And of course, this is what happened after they started making the various rules and trying to get along to keep the southern states from wanting the other slave states actually from receiving, because all the states were not, all the slave states were not just in the South. The South had the largest number because of the kind of crops that were grown there and the kind of labor that was being required. But the northern states also had large numbers of black people that were in indentured servants as well. And of course, when they started to make these rules to try to fit these people in, because when the rules were being made by the federal government, they said, well, okay, we're not going to support slavery. And of course, that left a lot of people unemployed, so to speak, because the farmers were saying, the southern slave owners were saying, okay, well, going to fix it, well, we can't expand our business, because that's what the whole issue came up on with the expansion toward the West.
Mm-hmm.
Became an issue, a national issue. And the rich people on the East Coast realized that the Southern people who were becoming equally as rich or was even more rich than they were, because they had a business going down there that was garnering more money than the people up north were garnering, because the people up north were garnering money from buying land and going and signing gold strikes and stuff like that. Well, people down south were garnering land from selling people.
So here's a question for you then, Professor, is that what would you say is, because we know that there's some technology that kind of came into force as far as like with the crops, I think maybe the cotton gin and things like that. what were some of those things that kind of put aside from, we know that there was, lots of, discrimination and all that, but just as far as opportunities, what were some of those things that pushed Black people from the South into the North, specifically into Chicago, into migrating?
Well, the harshness of the laws down south, the way the people enforced things, were the fact that they felt like they owned the Black people down south because that was their property. And so they felt like the federal government was depriving them of property, the Emancipation Proclamation. So they put out, like if you were born on that plantation, that you were their property. And when you got ready to leave, because the government said you were free, they didn't consider you free. Or when you left, they sent somebody even into the states that claimed that you were free. Once you came across the nation, diplomat, everybody assumed that you were in free states. But those free states still afforded you protection as long as the federal government could get someone there to protect you. Otherwise, they sent bounty hunters to those states to bring you back to the southern states. Eventually, the federal government itself adopted laws and policies that upheld those slave owners' rights that across the country. If you were found at a person's house or on a person's property that was in a free state, and it was proven that you belonged to someone down south, they were forced to bring you back and give you back to those people. And of course, that led to a lot of people who were free being kidnapped, who were born in free states being kidnapped. And that was what the picture 12 years of slave was written about. It was written about free people who were born in free states, who grew up free, who wound up being enslaved by those slave laws, because the country was trying to accommodate the wishes of those people who were slave owners, and it was a constant battle between the two. That's the same thing that's going on right now.
And another thing I was reading is that even though you got your freedom, you were free, they took things like land, okay? And they would say, well, you owe us for this land. Now you can stay on the land. We don't mind you staying on the land, but you got to work this land off.
Right. Well, that's the whole sharecropping thing. Yeah. That's exactly what happened with that.
But see, the whole point of that matter.
But some of them didn't owe anything for the land. They had worked. They had did exactly what they were supposed to do. Okay, and then let me say this. Then down south, they came up with all these black codes, and some of those black codes, those laws are still on the books today. They haven't been removed. That was another way they kept them enslaved. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
My primary concern was to show that we can tie together not only the black codes down south, but the national laws that are going on right now with the federal government. Because when it really boils down to it, the only sense of protection that people supposedly had was to turn to the federal government to enforce the law, the rule of law, as they call it. And that rule of law has never been clear. It's always been cloudy when it came down. It always changed based on how much pressure was put on the government by whatever states or whatever. Because the states, consequently, the war between the states is between the federal authority and the states having the right to nullify whatever the authority that the federal government would have to come in and enforce the law in terms of human rights. So it's always been a thing about who wants to keep control of the wealth. And that's why the sharecropping came about. Sharecropping came about, said, okay, well, if y'all will be set free, and we're the ones that taking care of you all this time, but okay, You got to have somewhere to live, so we'll let you stay there on the property as long as you work. And if you work, then of course, we got to have someone to cut the wood and keep plowing the fields and keep planting the crops and keep harvesting the crops and stuff for us. So, yeah, so you already know how to do that. So, and of course, the federal government said, okay, we're going to give you all opportunity, a leg up. So we're going to put 40 acres in the middle in possession of the slaves. But the majority of the slaves, first of all, they couldn't read because laws were created to keep people from teaching them how to read. I tell people all the time, we haven't been reading 100 years legitimately, legally in America. And so when it comes down to controlling, if the man who controls the books and writes down the figure that said what you owe and said how much money is money and how much is worth, whatever your labor is worth or whatever, controls that, and then he controls the resources that you have to have during the course of the year to feed your family, to feed the mule, to put seeds in the field. Well, what are you going to do with the land? Because it's going to sit there, and you have to live off of it. So consequently, black people are going to reduce to living off the land. That's why so many Southern people have cuisines that include wild game and things like that. And parts of animals that white people discarded. We took those parts of animals that white people discarded and made delicacies out of. People eat chitlins and they like liver and how many other things that we know as parts of just regular things that we cook. If they discarded, they didn't eat grains or peas and stuff.
Oh yeah, we share a lot of different foods and different things with a lot of Southern whites. Is a very similar culture. So, but let's talk a little bit about Reconstruction a little bit and just kind of set the scene for people. I think that it's kind of hard for us to conceptualize what was really going on in that time period. But one thing we have to remember is that, not only was it a civil war, I mean, our nation was split into two. So under Reconstruction, part of it was to bring, the Confederate and the Union back to be one country, because at that time it was split into two different countries. So we had that. But then the other thing is that, President Lincoln, he had a plan of Reconstruction, but subsequently he was assassinated. So then that means Andrew Jackson took over and became the president at the 17th president, I believe it is. And so you have two different men with two different philosophies. So, and neither one of them were necessarily looking out for the best interests of freedmen at the time. In fact, I was reading something that said that Lincoln actually had the idea of sending Black people to South America and to a colony there, and they were going to call it Lincolnia. And some of the Black leaders at the time, did not want to, agree to doing such a thing. But anyway, so, he was assassinated. But then Andrew Jackson, he, had other ideas as far as how to, what to do with Black people. So one of the things I think we have to realize is that, they didn't know what to do with us. And because we were no longer useful in the way that they felt that we should be utilized, it became a problem. So I think this is kind of the backdrop that we need to understand, that it was a very turbulent time, and they were trying to figure out, what are we going to do with these people?
Well, they were dealing primarily with the racial dilemma of whether you have a racial attitude or not. And I think that's the country's been in denial for that for as long as we have been over here, because even those people who are sympathizers to the black race of people are to racism itself, because the issue has never been resolved. Of course, when you start talking about bringing large numbers of people over here and finding out that they become a staple like cows or cattle or whatever that you can breed and make profit off of, then you want to breed more and more and more of them. So the numbers became rather offset in terms of residents of different areas. And plantation owners, some plantation owners owned up to about 2,000 people. They were the ones who were the breeding farms or whatever. And so those people all of a sudden who were of voting age when the Emancipation Proclamation happened became voting citizens of America all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. And these people had no way of dealing with that tremendous offset of numbers. So that's why you find gerrymandering and everything, and the Jim Crow laws became very powerful because they could not control those numbers, because if those people actually got to the point where they could start voting, they could vote all of the people in control out of office in one swoop, in one election or whatever. And so you see that going on constantly throughout the whole dilemma from 1910 all the way through, because they were useful enough to do all of the work, but they were not supposed to ever be smart enough to determine who was supposed to govern, who was supposed to control the banks or the money or the economic system itself. So they were supposed to remain separate from everybody. And that's why you have all the covenants that were drawn up. The federal government who took the covenant laws. They came up with the covenant laws in the cities of from Virginia and Maryland and those areas that were north. Everybody down south just believed that if they came north, they were free, but it was not. You came north from overt racism into a covert racism that they had up north. Mm-hmm. And so they still had separate communities and everything up here where they had laws, and they still have laws on the books in a lot of cities in the northern areas right now that have covenants in the communities that say in the contract of the landowners decreed that they didn't want.
Absolutely. We were talking about that last week. In Mundelein, Illinois, there was a woman that she was able to fight this covenant that was on some property that she owned. And she was able to change it, but it said no, I think it said no blacks, Jews, Chinese, or Japanese.
Mm-hmm. Can own that property or live in it.
Unbelievable.
And people live on the property right now where the largest communities are being built at. And so the only thing that was going on that was different in the South and the North, the southern areas gave, even with the 40 acres and a mule, they ceded all of the worst property that they could ever give to the black people, to the ones that said, oh yeah, this is your property. The lands that were flooded and the ones that had the stony property on it. It got so bad down there that you couldn't plow the land that they gave the people with a regular plow, the wooden plows they had. That's why they had to bring steel plows in, because the land was so terrible as far as cultivation was concerned, and black folks were out there trying to live on it, that they had to bring a special kind of plow down there to plow the property in order to cultivate it so they could make it grow. And black people moved on it and made it work. They found a way to cut the trees on it and stop it from flood or live through the floods or do whatever it was to make it happen off the land itself, because really now you got to remember the one that far removed from the culture of being in the jungle, so to speak. We do how to survive before they brought us over here.
Now, let me ask you a question. How did the cotton gin play into this into the Great Migration, or did it?
The cotton gin was one of the greatest enslavers that has ever been invented by a black man. A black man, allegedly, because we didn't write our history back then, but we had to hear this. But according to historians who have researched it, a black man who was working on a cotton plantation. Back then, they were separating the cotton from the cotton seed by hand. But he was sitting down and watching a bunch of caged chickens that he had, and get away from the cats that were trying to stretch their way through the through the cage that they were in. And every time the cat would reach and try to get the chicken, he would come back with nothing but feathers in his claw.
Ah.
And so the brother that was sitting there looking at that said, "Oh man, that's sort of like pulling stuff from the cotton seed." And of course, there was a white man named Eli Whitney that had a tool shop. He was a tool shop, or a blacksmith, or whatever you want to call him back then.
Yeah.
And, but he had the means of making machinery. And you know how we are, when we're happy about an idea and we want to tell people something about something we just discovered. They went and told Whitney about this and conveyed it to him. And he converted it to an idea and wound up patenting the idea, which wound up becoming the cotton gin. And of course, because of the cotton gin, they were able to produce larger and larger amounts of cotton that they were selling, not just to American industries, but to foreign countries that they were getting money from. And so it became an enslaver instead of an emancipator.
Oh, wow.
So would you say that was instrumental in kind of mobilizing African Americans to leave the South, because they were not necessarily needed for to be like workers at less manual requiring less manual labor?
Well, I think what it was is that the country always used to, if they came up with an idea that was profitable in one area, they wanted to experiment with it in other areas where people had money. And it was like a chess game between the people who owned the land, who actually controlled the resources, the bankers and so on. Because that even got to the point where it started affecting the poor white people too, because there's a gentleman named Daniel Shades. They call it Shades Rebellion. He and the farmers got tired of the landowners, of the people who loaned money, coming in and foreclosing on their properties and stuff when they had bad crops or whatever. And they had a rebellion, but they didn't have any weapons to fight. That's how the federal militia was actually founded, and why the federal government convened and actually decided that they were going to come up with a protective organization called the military to keep the people who were enforcing the rules from being attacked by the folks that they were imposing the rules over. And of course, to answer your question, of course, the cotton gin and the creation of cotton as a major money making mechanism in America was going to create a need for more and more black people who were the ones who knew how to do the farming and create the cotton, and actually were at the base of the cotton industry anyway. But out of a sudden, during the time when that becomes because it wasn't just cotton, it was tobacco as well, and sugar cane. And so when those staples became widely sought after, because sugar cane was sought after because they made rum out of sugar cane and other things out of it. And of course, tobacco products have always been very popular. across the world market as well. And so those are the crops, if you go back and look at them, well, they were being grown widely, not just in the southern states, but all the way all across the nation as well. And labor was being required for them, and black people happened to be at the center of the most skillful laborers that knew how to go out and do those things.
And I want to say a lot of inventions came about during those times and before that, because a lot of inventors gave away their secrets or their knowledge of inventions, because that's how a lot of them got their freedom.
Well, yeah, because see there was a supposed trade-off during a time when white people got so poor in the South area because the government imposed rules over Southern wealth, and it had such a devastating effect. The Southerners started burying their gold because they didn't want to pay no taxes. They still don't want to pay them now. But anyway, they started burying their gold and stuff like that and trying to conceal their wealth and whatever they own. But what really happened, in essence, was that empowered black people to be able to go out and take what legal resources they had and actually become part of the economic system that we are now. And we're a powerful buying force in the American system when it comes down to our net worth, annual worth is like in the area of almost $4 trillion. So we then became necessary. The money we made became necessary because for some people, white people, to survive, they had to form little stores and to the black population in order to make it.
Now that's an interesting thing. So now the other side of that is, although a lot of black people were able to kind of come up in terms of just economically, there was a backlash, and that's when the KKK came around, because they started to become very resentful of that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so when we look at I did my master's thesis, matter of fact, was concerned with racial attitudinal patterns and their impact on American politics. I think that back in '78. What happened in a lot of ways is that there were no attitudinal adjustments across the country, and people kept living in denial. They wanted, the ones who owned the slaves at one point before the government came against them. They wanted to pick their shit out and say, "Oh, well, okay, we're just as good as you educated people on the East Coast are. They're not going to Brown and Harvard and Yale and all y'all schools and stuff, and we're not as well educated as y'all. But I'm Mark Twain. I grew up being barefoot and going down to the river, but I can write the tales and the things about what we did, and people are finding that interesting. And so they wanted to prove that there was no difference between them.
So there was still there was a divide. What do they call them? The carpetbaggers, the folks from the North, and then AKA Yankees, and then you had the people in the South. So there's still, even though the nation had come together as far as becoming one country again, you still have that divide between the North and the South, huh?
Yeah, the basic thing though, who controlled the money? Whoever controlled there's a statement that in German actually it says, "He who controls the wealth controls the land."
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the people in the North, in the proprietary colonies, they call them, when the 13 colonies that came over and formed, they had people who sponsored them from country that put the governors of those colonies over here so that they could make money for them. They got products from over here, so to speak, and sent them back to the countries that they came from, like Spain, France, and England. And of course, that is where the conflict wound up happening at, because it was those countries who were fighting over control of the American resources. It wasn't so much America trying to fight for freedom. It was those countries trying to fight over who was going to be in control of what. Spain controlled the western part of America, and over in with Texas and all of the western states happen to be. France controlled a large portion of America. Down for the New Orleans, Louisiana area, so it's the Louisiana Purchase area.
And one thing I want to add is that just kind of to it's hard for us to think of it now, since the U.S. being one of the world powers, if not the world power. Back then, which was way ahead of World War II, prior to World War II, we were not a world power at all. And as you mentioned, we had these other countries that still, were owning certain parts of the continent. That so we were not as we weren't on the world scene like we are now.
Well, the thing about the world wars that I think that we should be able to bring out in this series that we're going to be doing is the fact that had it not been for the people who were enslaved, who then were beginning to fight for their freedom, who were natural born fighters in the first place.
Yeah.
We could take no weapons, things that were not like the guns and stuff and the swords and all that the people had who considered themselves civilized. But we could take and make our own weapons and do more damage to people that we were fighting against than they could. And so we were the best fighters when it came down to the world war, even though they didn't give us they didn't give us any rank or anything, but they put us out there, and we were the ones who provided the foundation for the soldiers to do what they did.
And for a long time, they.
Yep. And how did we do that, Don? Can you talk a little bit about that?
No, what we did was we provided all of the necessary strategies and resources for movement of soldiers, and also when they did allow us to become hard to put our own regiments out there on the field, we were much better fighters than they were with less resources. And they
didn't even recognize it. As far as for a long time, you did not hear anything about it in the history book.
No, that never. I mean, I asked for permission from the state of Mississippi in 1978 to give me an opportunity to do a content analysis of civics textbooks where civics were being taught across the state of Mississippi. And the State Department wrote my department head that was over my thesis and told him to get me to choose another subject, because I was not going to be allowed the liberty of doing a research analysis of the books that they chose, and they were forcing people to learn from every day. And so he felt like my department head had a meeting with me in graduate school and told me, he said, well, I don't know. He was white, but he said, I don't know how to explain this to you, Donald. But the thing that they're saying to me with the letter that we wrote to him for that list that you're asking for is that they're not going to comply. And that's what it really boils down to. So what you need to do is come up with an alternative source or alternative thesis for your research, because it's going to be difficult for you to get the material that you need in order to do the kind of research. So
what year was that, Donald?
1978.
Okay, so that's it. So imagine, I mean, that's really, in the big scheme of things, that wasn't that long ago. When you think about, just being able to tell the story and give the narrative of what happened in history. And it seems that, I mean, to this very day, you know, with the critical race theory or the objection of, I kind of object to calling it that, but just really teaching Black history to kids, it has become such a point of contention that people don't want to tell the truth, and they don't want to hear the truth, right?
Mhm. Well, you know what? Let me say this. We're talking about Black history, and we're talking about the Great Migration, and all of this is centered based around the word RACE, race. Okay, race basically is unreal. It is. It is unreal because biologically it doesn't exist. Really, it doesn't. Because you know what? Biologically, we are all the same.
Right. It's just the
Race,
physical of what we see. It's
race
just
was
adaptations.
created. It was
Mhm.
created to enslave African Americans in the colonial America.
Or Africans at the time, but yes.
Yes, yes, at the
Mhm.
time. But that's why it was created. Until America, not America, until the world can get past RACE, until they can get past that, we will always have a problem. But they have to get, let me finish, they have to get past race. Once they can get past that, you won't have these problems. I got to say this too, and then I'm going to just shut up.
You're on a roll, KL.
And then I'm going to shut up. As long as, and I have to say this because see, it's on my head, and if I don't say it, I'll forget it. As long as you have people in Washington, D.C., that set up there in the White House, that were there before the computer, you're going to always have a racist problem. People may not want to admit it, but let me tell you, the truth will set you free. And America needs to do some soul searching. And I have to say this, just like Biden said he wanted to put the first African American on the Supreme Court qualified. He wanted her to be a female. He said qualified. And there are some African American women that are qualified. They already started talking. They already started talking about it. Okay? So once they can get past race and America admit the truth to its history, it's going to be a much better place. But it has to start, in Washington. It has to start with the government. And I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a very hard thing to do.
Right. But you know what though?
I'm
I
sure.
I don't necessarily think it has to start in Washington, because I think a lot of I think it's a state problem. Because a lot of these people, depending, it goes from state to state that people are objecting to it. And I just think that we probably need to look at some of our state legislatures, and kind of evaluate that. I think state of Illinois, I don't think that the critical race theory has been objected to. I don't know if somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. But places like Texas, it has been. So I think personally, I feel that it's a state issue.
I'm putting this comment up here because somebody voiced it. I don't think it really has a lot to do with what we're talking about, but they're talking about abortion. I wanted to put this up here, okay? Because they put it up here, and I want to say the name of the show is Opinion, and this is their opinion. It has to do with Planned Parenthood and abortion. So I wanted to put this on the screen, and maybe this is a subject that we will talk about one day.
No, sure, definitely, most
Sure.
definitely.
But I did want to share Tyrone Jackson's comment. Okay, We thank you, Tyrone. We thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And so that concludes our segment here on Reconstruction sharecropping, so 1865 to 1916. Next week we'll be talking. The next episode 2 will be Sweet Home Chicago. What's old is new again. 1916 to 1970. So we'll be talking about, what happened once folks came up to Chicago. Like I said, we're focusing on Chicago specifically. We know that the Great Migration happened to a lot of, in conjunction with a lot of northern cities, but since we're based here in Chicago, we want to talk a little bit more about what happened when we got here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the blues and
how were we accepted.
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
absolutely.
We'll be talking about that next time.
That sounds great. Listen, my name is Katie Lowe.
I'm Opinionated Lorie.
And we have Professor Donald Kincaide, analyst, on the phone. Listen, we are so happy that you decided to spend your time with us today. Now, you can catch Opinions every Tuesday at 5 right here on Meta Facebook Live and YouTube. You can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple, and iHeart Radio. We thank you so much. Hey, we will catch you next Tuesday at 5 o'clock with part 2 of a great migration from the Jim Crow South to Chicago. Hey, and we're going to take you out with our favorite music artist. Not too late, because it's not too late to remember that race is an invented word.
That's
and
right.
Don't you forget it. And you heard that right here on Opinion. See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you.